Great. All right. Welcome everyone to the July 18th Dev Call. Topics on deck today are we have some updates on Hubble, just health of the network, ongoing issues and updates on them. We have some updates on storage reduction, frames and actions, lots of stuff happening there. And on the Warpcast side, we have three areas that the team is focused on, which is new user experience, feed improvements, and direct cast improvements. And we're going to talk through all of those. So let's start with Hubble. I'll do a quick update. So the thing that we've been thinking about this week is there's been a large number of nodes that have spun up over the last month. We've been adding something like 1,000-ish nodes, 1,000 to 2,000 nodes a month. And the root cause seems to be a bunch of users who are following YouTube tutorials that say like run a hub, you will get an airdrop, and then are spinning up hubs on VPSs and whatnot. This caused like a couple of small downstream issues. They weren't major, but they just like kind of saturated the P2P network and whatnot. And we can go like fix all of that and spend time solving and scaling the network. But we're sort of at this crazy point where I think there's more Farcaster nodes than ETH nodes right now. And most of them are not really necessary. And so rather than go and try to like do unnecessary scaling work, we've actually added a bunch of prompts into the setup process, which get users to act that there actually will be no airdrop rewards. And if the only reason you're spending $10 is to try and get money, you're not going to get money. And please shut down your hub and save us some time and use some resources. So that actually has brought down the number of hubs. I think we're at 13K. We're now back down to 10K. And I think it will continue to reduce the number of hubs. We have some thoughts on what to do if this really doesn't slow down, including like potentially staking or paying or something to run a hub. But hopefully this like simple change is sufficient to do this. The second issue is Alchemy has actually seen some actors spin up a bunch of different free accounts and trying to run like hubs en masse. And they've actually started shutting down these, trying to detect and shut down these accounts because that's kind of in violation of their terms of service. They did hit a couple of legitimate users. So if you are running a node on an Alchemy plan and you have been hit by this, feel free to DC me and I will help get that resolved quickly. For the most part, it's only hit like airdrop farmers or people who are like trying to abuse the network. Cool. Any questions on that before I move on to the other hub subtopics? No. Okay. The other thing worth talking about, let me actually bring up chat so I don't miss any questions in there. Cool. The other issues that we're talking about, one is hub divergence. So there's a long tail of small issues that we've been debugging where one or two messages for certain FIDs or certain users have been out of sync across hubs. There doesn't seem to be a common theme across all of them, but Sanjay's been spending his time working through this and figuring out why certain events or IDs are not syncing. We've mostly been working with Naynar on this, who have identified one or two of these use cases, and we are working on that. If you are seeing any divergence or any like messages on your hub that are missing from another hub, please let us know. So far, they've been very isolated and very narrow cases, and we're actively working on grinding them down to zero. Had a second question in chat on will the prompt come up every time we upgrade? No. So I believe the way it should work is you can either type it in the prompt or you can set an environment variable. And if you set this environment variable, you'll never get prompted again. And if I'm not mistaken, the first time you fill out the prompt, it actually sets that envar for you. So once you've acted, you're never going to have to do this again. So beyond that, all upgrades will be automatic. There's a question on some users complain about different follower accounts across Warpcast and Naynar. It's possible. I know we had a bug there that was fixed last week, but Waj, if you have any other specific issues, feel free to tag us on it and we're happy to take a look. Cool. The third topic, we actually have the Warpcast sync status dashboard. So this measures how well Warpcast is publishing data to hubs and how well it's reading data from hubs. Very important for us to keep this as fast as possible. And if you kind of look at how it's been working over the last week, this is a public dashboard, so anyone should be able to open this. We've actually been doing pretty well. Most of our messages have been read by Warpcast from hubs and processed and added in under a minute. And most messages have been written in, well under a minute, few seconds for the most part. So this is trending well. Big shout out to Shane and the Warpcast backend team for doing a lot of work to parallel process and speed up all of this. And we think we're in a very good place where Warpcast speed of reading messages is now no longer the bottleneck, at least for this order of magnitude. Cool. I will actually share a link to this dashboard in case anyone wants to follow, but this should be status.warpcast.com, should be what you check if you are ever worried about sync issues. And for the most part, this tracks any like large scale issues where you're writing messages and Warpcast is not seeing them. All right, next topic, storage reduction. So we had an FIP last week about reducing storage. We've been listening to feedback from users and from some internal devs, and there are actually a couple of different angles we could approach this at. Like one is just cutting the size of the storage unit universally for everybody. Another approach that someone proposed was actually making incremental storage units more expensive rather than making the base storage units more expensive. And there's actually a few different ways we can approach this. So we want to spend some more time gaming all of that out before we make this change. So we are likely postponing this for one release cycle. The team is also busy working on the hub divergence issues, so we've kind of let this sit on the back burner, and we will bring this up for the next cycle. Storage is still important. It's just not as important as the sync issues for us right now, which are actively affecting users and developers. So expect us to come back with a more clear proposal on this, maybe next protocol meeting or so, and expect it to roll out in the following weeks. Cool. Third topic, there's been a lot of progress on the frames actions side. So I want to turn it over to Dan, Horsefax, and Tony, who've been doing most of the work on this. The one of you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let me let Connor drive on the composer action side of things, and then frame signatures. Maybe Tony, I think you were working on that, and then maybe even just also talk about the document dev docs.
Sure. Yeah. So composer actions, we're working on expanding that beyond. We have the 3 fixed actions in Warpcast right now. Those are really kind of prototypes for the initial implementations of these, but we're working on opening that up to kind of the next rounds of actions. So we have a very active chat with folks who are building these. There's a link here in the Notion doc if you want to join that. That'll take you directly to join the chat in Warpcast. We have a dev tool that we shipped this week. So there's an Explorer playground, kind of like we have for composer actions, where you can build and test your composer action. So it pops up a composer, you can try it out there. We're actively working on the metadata that we're going to need apps to provide here, and what it's going to look like to kind of submit these actions and get them into Warpcast. Like that's still a little bit TBD for this next round, but hopefully devs have the tools they need to go try this out and experiment with it and get started building one if you're interested in building one. So yeah, we'd love to hear what you're building. Please join the chat. Let us know what you're working on as we expand these out. And yeah, there's a link here to the spec in the doc as well. We have changed that a little bit since the last time we checked in the last meeting. So if you are building one of these, go check out that doc. It's pretty comprehensive now in terms of what you need to do in order to build one of these actions.
All right, maybe just working. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I've been working on frame signatures. So I don't know if y'all saw, but Polymarket launched a signature that or a frame that lets you bet an app, and it basically uses 2 EIP 712s to make that happen. So that was really cool. We have a chat. If you're building one of these, ping me or Horsefax and we'll get you in there. And if you have any questions, just reach out. I know they ran into some blockers, so we're happy to help. I think that Butterfly is also implementing the signatures right now as well, so these should start working across different clients. The other thing I've been working on is the Farcaster docs. So we took a look at these and they hadn't been touched in a while, and we're kind of heavily focused on like learning about the protocol and these kind of like low-level operations, and less so on the things that most developers are actually doing, which are like frames and actions, signing with Farcaster. So taking a look over that and trying to make it more relevant to developers that are coming on and want to get started on building simple things like frames, and less so on protocol stuff. It'll still be there, just less featured.
Maybe just one last point here. We are actively pushing on composer actions based on the idea that if we nail this primitive, it does 2 things. One, it gives developers an ongoing relationship, a certain class of developers an ongoing relationship in terms of you're creating a frame, right? Like you can create a poll or you can create an event, and then all the new potential use cases. I think that the other thing that we're actually interested in is to the degree that developers actually have a larger and more interesting canvas, right? You have a full iframe that you can kind of go do whatever you want. The more creative and more polished the apps that come through Composer Actions, I think it gives us more confidence that there is actually demand to go and kind of revisit how we would do that potentially with normal frames in feed and kind of thinking through that. So I would highly encourage anyone who's looking to kind of play around with like pushing the envelope in terms of what you can kind of do with this primitive to actually explore this and kind of follow through on all the stuff that Horsefax is pushing out here. And if this does work, we think it both increases interesting content on the network, right? Like the ability for people to do a poll is just yet another interesting kind of cast and something that benefits the entire network, but also from a developer primitive standpoint, kind of helps inform the roadmap as we think about frames and other Legos.
Yeah, on that point, one thing I've been reminded to add is make sure you check out at the bottom of the spec. We've written a guide on UI guidelines for building a form and building a composer action. So thanks to Piril for writing that up. But we have some guidelines in there for styling these, making them look nice, and kind of designing for how they'll be displayed in Warpcast and other clients. So please take a look at that if you're building one. We have some good tips and guidelines in there for you.
Yeah. On this, I think we're going to be pretty aggressive around. I think if that's not your strong suit, like try to keep things simple, follow the guide, use Shade or Shad CDN or whatever. What are these like libraries that just kind of like makes a lot of things easy for you? Because bad UX is then kind of blamed on Warpcast because people don't realize it's like a third-party site for the most part, and then just generally Composer Actions. And so really focusing on high quality to start, I think really helps kind of create a like first impression for people that gets them more excited about using Composer Actions, and that I think will have a kind of nice flywheel effect to get other developers and which long term.
I think we might have lost Dan. So let me pick up from there. So before we move on to Warpcast topics, last thing, I want to give a shout out to Daryl for writing a very thorough VM2 upgrade PR for hubs, which has been very helpful. So thank you for doing that and also getting the tree shaking work. All right, some updates on the Warpcast side. So one big thing we're working on this week is changing the way the new user experience works. So today, if you sign up to Farcaster, on Warpcast, the way that it works is you pick a bunch of interests. We have people and channels associated with those interests. And based on what you've selected, you will follow some initial selection of people that gives you a good feed. The reason we did this was twofold. One, it actually helps other clients. So if you sign up on Warpcast and then go to Supercast or go to anything else, you don't start off with an empty feed. You actually have some amount of interesting users on the network, so your feed is not dead. Second reason was it was actually the fastest to ship. Trying to do something more sophisticated like TikTok or whatnot just took a lot more time. And so we started off with the simple version. As we've had time to go back and spend on thinking, how do we make the new user experience as good as possible? One of the challenges with this follow approach is, let's say we follow somebody that you don't like, you now have to go do extra work to go unfollow them, and most people just don't do that. And we're shipping a new version of the new user experience that's going to take a very different approach. So rather than auto follow a bunch of people when you start, again, based on your interests, it's going to generate an algo feed based on our predictions of what users are posting the most interesting stuff in those groups, but you have to explicitly follow people to add them to your follow list. And the way the algo works is day 0, you start, you have no followers whatsoever. All your content is like pure Warpcast algo feed. Like we just give you stuff that we think you like, we keep changing it, and we encourage you to follow. As you start tapping the follow button and the number of people you follow goes up, it's less pure algo feed and more content that you follow, but ranked based on what we think is most interesting to you right now. So it kind of evolves from an algo feed into a following feed that is then sorted by some set of heuristics, which is kind of how the feed works today. So we have an early version of this that's actually shipped. So about 10% of users signing up today are going through this experience. There's still some bugs and issues and UI things that we need to work through. But over the next few weeks, we're hopeful that we will actually get this to a point where all new users are going through this experience, and that will end up with a smaller set of follows, but maybe more tightly coupled with what that person's actual interests are versus something that we prescribe up front. So let us know if you have any feedback, especially if you invite friends who go through that process, whether it's positive or negative. We'd love to hear about it. And we think this will actually just result in people getting staying around on Farcaster. Cool. Any questions on this? Who is rewarded by this change? So it will honestly be people that post the best content in categories that we create. We'll probably make this public over time. We're still tweaking what it is, but it's something that will evolve constantly and will be mostly curated by Warpcast. It's like Warpcast POV on who is posting the most interesting stuff in art, who's posting the most interesting stuff in music, who's posting the most interesting stuff in Ethereum, and based on which you select as a user, you will get content from that user. And again, we will prioritize people who post good content and also people who are active. Like, we're not going to put you into someone's feed if you haven't cast anything in a month. So it'll be a combination of those two factors.
Yeah, just to highlight, I think what people are going to do is they're going to rejoice that the auto follow list is off, and then they're going to realize it actually rewards the people who are most active and interesting, which probably ends up being even more of a power law potentially, but is a better new user experience. And it actually is a much clearer experience, is that if you're active and interesting, you're going to get rewarded. But I think actually people think somehow that like getting rid of the auto follow list is somehow going to make it easier for them. If anything, this is going to just like reward the best people on the network in terms of just like engagement.
Cool. There's a question on how does Narrowcast fit into this model. So we will probably pair channels with interests as well. So if you say you're interested in music, maybe you follow electronic and this and this and this, and so Narrowcast from that channel and those users will filter down into that group of people. Sweet. Any other questions on this? Going once, going twice. Okay. Next chunk is feed improvements. We're continuing to make improvements to spam detection. Again, getting better at false positives and false negatives. But overall, it seems like the change we made about 2.5 weeks ago to do more aggressive spam filtering and move stuff into show more has worked reasonably well. And for the most part, things have been going good on threads and conversations, and people are not seeing a lot of spam. The one thing we are aware of is sometimes we're not fast enough to catch spammers. So someone will come up with a spam account, they will post, and like 7 hours later, we catch them and label them as spammy, but you still see the content. So we're working on improving the performance of these models to get better and better, and to actually get rid of the spam quickly. There's also a couple of edge cases on the feed generation that we're working on that some users have complained about. So there's 3 things that are top of mind for us. One is, if you've been away from the app for a long time, like let's say you come back after 3 days, the app will say, what's the most interesting stuff since you've been gone in the last 2 days? And sometimes that ends up with the initial load of your feed just having everything be a day old because there were just a lot of bangers a day ago that have become obvious because they've gotten a lot of likes. We're going to add a little more randomness into the feed, so it biases towards new content and makes it better. Another side effect is, because the feed prioritizes of all the people you follow, who do you interact with the most? Sometimes that actually feels a little static, and when you open your feed, you'll see the same 3 or 4 people in the same order, which again gets a little annoying. So again, we're going to add a little bit of randomness into that, which is going to make that feel a little more organic and help with discovery of new stuff. Last issue, we've seen a couple of reports of this. Some people crazily run out of stuff in their feed. They actually literally hit the bottom and have read everything. And the experience there is not particularly great. We just kind of dump you into a chronological feed. So we're going to make some changes where you at least know, hey, I'm out of stuff. Most people don't hit this, but if you for some reason don't follow a lot of people, like you only follow 10, 20 people and you check the app very often, you will hit this periodically, and we will tell you that you are out of stuff. Cool. That's the stuff on feed improvements. DC improvements. Dan, I know Gox is out today. Do you want to take a point on this one?
Sure. One thing I wanted to welcome is Gabriel, who's been a longtime member on the Farcaster community and is now working with us full time. And he and Goxu are both kind of working with me pretty closely on DC performance, as well as just fixing the jank. I just put a image in the chat because we're in disabled screen sharing, which is fine. But we have a an evolving Datadog dashboard where we're just similar to the kind of Hubs team, like waking up every morning and kind of looking at overall performance. And so the screenshot I shared here is a kind of like overview of web first time to paint, and then a kind of metric that we use for both Android and iOS in terms of slow screen render and the percentage of users that are hitting it. We've actually made a decent amount of improvement over the last 30 days to the point where, we're starting to get closer to what we would consider green. So below, 1.5%, which is a recommendation from Datadog. But overall, we're really focusing on hard crashes and performance. And so there's just a bunch of stuff where we the most common paper cuts. And so actually Gabriel has been driving a lot of that. So for example, like people are complaining about how the emojis work and kind of the glitchiness there, has kind of cleaned that up both on web and now actually on mobile. So we have like emoji search for the first time. And then Gosu is also investigating large group performance. So we actually got added to a few groups where people are, like consistently posting hundreds of messages an hour, and getting in a place where we can actually profile the performance of that, understanding kind of like the scroll behavior and just knocking out a bunch of those kind of like paper cuts. The thing here is that ultimately DCs drive retention. Retention obviously drives content on the network, and content on the network is actually the flywheel for growth. And so while it's still very Warpcast centric, right, we don't have interoperable DCs, our view is if we can get DCs to a really stable place that like consistently people are not moving to Telegram when the chats are starting on Farcaster, we know we're in a good place to then actually be able to go push this out from a kind of read API and then interoperability, like getting that roadmap done. And then the best practices that we've learned from there, we can actually kind of make sure get pushed out into the community.
Cool. I think that brings us to the end of the topic. Any last questions on DCs before we open up for general Q&A?
What is the BMC?
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good.
Do I need to come to the video?
No, you don't need to come to the video. What is the BMC?
So the BMC, the thing that I shared with you in the last call on 2nd July, where I shared that some strategies for growth for Farcaster.
Yeah,
And you said,
I appreciate you sharing that. I think at a high level, I don't think that there's anything that we can go and market. Like there is no one who's like, no large group of people that we can actually go put a targeted thing and say, hey, come to use Farcaster, it's better for you. I think we have to fundamentally figure out what the organic source of interesting and entertaining content on the network is, which will drive user growth, which will then drive developer interest, which then creates a flywheel of all three things. We do not have that. So I don't actually think any marketing solves that problem. If anything, it's kind of like hand-to-hand combat of trying to figure out creators, figure out new user experience, boosting smaller accounts. I've been actually trying to do that recently. So we had a really interesting journalist join the network recently. He's now channel pilled. Like you got, tip pilled and then channel pilled. He created his own channel. So that is the thing that we're trying to go figure out. That is not marketing. That is sales. Sales has to come from me. And so I will be kind of the one driving that. I'm always open to other people like potentially doing that. I think the second thing to think about though is like it's just getting people to cast more. So like a lot of that is actually product oriented stuff.
all right. So, I think there's some. I was not able to explain myself properly in the data that I shared, and maybe if I would like think from your perspective that the way if is good content the only way in which we are attracting users?
I think so. I think everything else is not sustainable. So ultimately good content and the kind of rewards of getting good content are secondary from that, right? It's like building an audience, monetizing either directly or indirectly, but like you can't fake interesting and organic like content, right? So that's like the only thing that actually matters in terms of actual network growth. There are a bunch of other things that we can do to improve, but I think like that is upstream problem for us to solve.
Okay, I'll keep working on it and try to make it better so that it is in sync with the way you are thinking. The second question was on channels, the one that I shared with you, that of having two kinds of channels. One is completely decentralized and other is centralized, keeping the brand and the future of consumer crypto and stuff.
Yeah, so again, I think we can change channels. Ultimately, channels, we still haven't figured out the upstream issue on channels is like, can we actually drive the amount of interesting and organic content? And in a world where that's actually really starting to hit for a lot of different channels, then I think it's worth figuring out, okay, what is the plan for actually getting the primitive into the protocol? But what I fear is we go and add whatever version of the primitive that we had, like coming out of Farcon, we were like, okay, let's go. But we're fundamentally limited by content. So we have to drive more content. And I don't actually think, changing knobs and ways channel works is actually going to be a huge driver of it. It fundamentally comes down to, can we get people to post more? Can we get them more distribution? And so that's a lot of the work we've been talking about here.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy to follow up offline.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Cool. I think that brings us to the end. We've covered all the topics. I don't think there's any other questions in chat. One last call if anything has anything they want to discuss. If not, we will wrap today and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Going once, going twice. All right. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you all soon.